Right, this is going to be episode 41 of Oversight. And even though, in theory, this is just a normal episode, Monty, the Overwatch League season goes on, the games get played, we discuss the games, we try and get the odd player on, people complain about whatever we didn't ask the player about, because again, like 3 hours of footage, all that matters really is what we didn't address to that specific person. But actually, there is a twist to this one, because I did hype this already. I alluded to this on a past episode. But one of our guests for this particular show, the guy who's in the bottom left-hand corner, Peak, did basically tell me something that, listen, from Counter-Strike, Monty, I've obviously known Swedish people in esports a long time, and they almost never talk shit. They almost never go out their way to criticize people. Like, I'll give you an example, okay? One of the, great in-game leaders in Swedish Counter-Strike was a guy called Threat, and he's actually done, he did, the not this one, but the second to last CSGO major, and, one of his problems is he could almost never say any team was bad or any team was, not good. He would have to sort of be like, yeah, they're good, and then the other team's very good. It's like, fucking all right, let me get out. All right, someone get me Ark's dictionary. I'm going to translate it in Swedish. It was like one of those types of things, right? So all I'm going to tell you is, when Peak tells me, I've got some spicy opinions about GOATs and the teams that are playing it badly, that excites me, Monty, because I know there's potentially fire here. So this episode, culling of the goats, perhaps, something like that,
Spicy, if it's spicy opinions about goats, does that mean we're making some sort of Jamaican curry on this broadcast?
Okay. Yeah, well, we're supplying the jerk sauce. That's you mainly, Monty. There we go.
We already got the title.
There we go.
Jerk sauce.
Yeah, there you go. There we go. Which works on many levels, obviously. So, Right, so here's the thing. On this episode, Peak, here's what we're going to do. We are just going to do it like normal. We're going to talk about specific teams, etc. But if on any of these teams, it's one that you want to actually make some points about this, just jump in. Just let me know. You can make that your point, whatever. You are here to figure out which of these teams needs to be addressed, be talked about in that sense. Because obviously the problem, I mention it every week, but there are too many teams in the Overwatch League now. We can't talk about every team. So what I try to do generally is talk about the teams that are on top, the teams that you unexpectedly are doing bad, and then between there, we have to just go based on interest value. So our other guest anyway, so Peak, as I say here, former coach of Envious a long time ago, Dallas Fuel. No, it actually wasn't Envious, technically. It was Misfits, then it was Dallas Fuel, right? Yes, that's it. It wasn't Envious in the middle. And then our other guest, obviously, Sideshow. You can see by the background, he's still in the same fucking room. Everyone knows.
I've never left.
We all know I know, at this point, it does feel like you are never going to leave. It feels like you're just going to be, eventually Skype called into the broadcast from your room like that. Let's check in with Sideshow, see what he thinks. It's going to be that eventually.
I'm just ranting and raving in the northeast of England somewhere. Sleep schedule completely whacked.
Yeah, you're basically just the equivalent of that guy from Network. You're just going to be like... And I want you to contact Nate Nancer and Jeff Kaplan about goats. I want you to get mad, damn it.
Oh, by the way, I do have to call you out, Sideshow, because when we were making fun of you on the desk the other day, and then you responded by complaining that you were working 12 hours and working more. What critical fact of that situation did you leave out?
No idea. It seemed perfectly valid to me.
Oh yeah,
nope,
you're right.
Here's why you were wrong.
Difference is you get to sit there and make money 2 ways, don't you? Don't you?
Yes, I said.
I was like, is this motherfucker actually complaining about working 12-hour days? I'm like, I too wish I could make double money.
You know the best part of that as well. You just rant just to get the reaction from the Twitch chat, and then just fire them up a little bit. It's like stoking a fire.
I know, it's great. I'm enjoying it. So now this is the third part of that. So we got to make fun of you on the broadcast, you got to make fun of us, and then now we get the truth. So
that's the truth. No, that is the truth.
Okay, right, here's the thing. Obviously we have to start by talking about the LA Valiant, surely, because when you're a team like they are, where obviously you were a playoff team, you're a team that people expect to be good, etc., to basically be already out of stage 1 this many weeks in
before the Justice,
it's pretty fucked up.
To be fair, they're only out because they had one more game played.
Yeah, they had to play more than the Justice, exactly. Yeah, don't take that away from the Justice. They could still do that as well. They could still technically be tied for bottom. They're just not at the moment.
Yeah, so currently the Valiant are, in fact, winning the race to the bottom.
So where do we start? Come on, Sideshow. Start us off. What the fuck's happened to Valiant?
I know where we can start.
Oh, go. I think someone's got bad goats. Let's go.
No. Okay, so the first few matches they did in week 1,
Yeah.
When they released the video, not exposing, but revealing that they use Costa as a bench, basically.
Yes.
They also show the post-game talk where they say, you did really good when they lost like super hard versus
okay.
I think it was NYXL. But
no, it was their first game. It was their first game against Spark where they lost 3-2 right at the end. But Moon was like, "Oh, you guys shouldn't feel too bad. You played really well. I know you've been doing things have been really hard over the past couple of weeks, but I'm proud of how you performed today." That was roughly what he said, right, Peak?
Yeah, that's basically how you start enforcing these bad behaviors they had in game. And I think that's a good start because that's how they entered the stage, and then they make like these crazy shifts. And we can talk about how Reddit is influencing it, or maybe Twitter. But I feel like they didn't know what was wrong from game one, and they still don't know. Maybe they do.
I have a question. Do you guys think the Valiant knows that Lucio can ride on walls? Because I'm not convinced they know that.
They do. Custer does it. That's why they bench him.
Exactly.
They're like, mate, get back on the main tank and speed him in there.
It's like, revealing that Santa Claus doesn't exist. So like Custer knows it, but no one.
He's like, shut up! Don't tell the others. Don't tell the others. Listen, don't spoil the magic for them.
Yeah, I mean, when they were playing their first couple of matches, and I was, there was this debate about Cookie coming into the lineup, and I was trying to think about, what he added compared to Custer, and we hadn't really seen Custer play, and so I was giving it a couple of games until I had some kind of firm opinion on Cookie. But having watched all of the games now, first of all, I'll say that it keeps getting worse for Valiant. Valiant and Gladiators seem to be two teams that keep getting worse as the weeks go on. Most teams are either inconsistent or better.
Valiant is just progressively getting worse and worse, like every time you watch them, which is just insane to me.
It is very weird. And also, at the beginning, there was a few errors with how Kuki was playing, but I felt like, broadly speaking, he was like speed boost disengaging at the right time with his team and being able to get some decent points of aggression. Certainly wasn't making any plays, and the beats did not look good. Their support ultimates have been the worst thing, one of the worst things about this team, I think, and one reason that they're really getting shafted in the matches. But in the recent game against the Charge, which I missed and had to watch a VOD review of, what were they doing? They didn't speed boost disengage once. They were losing fights, and the other team was only using a rally. Like, they're just dying to a Brig ultimate. I mean, come on. All you have to do is press your E ability and run backwards. And they can't even manage that.
My favorite thing is they weren't really using it that much to engage either. So they would drop the beat, and then the charge would slowly back up until it was gone. And then they just re-engage. I'm like, what are you doing?
But I swear they were doing that much better against the Spark in their opening week. And when they played against NYXL, they took Spark and NYXL to 5 maps. And they actually looked like they were at least going through the motions of what they should be doing. But I think they really got fucked up by how they were using their ult economy in those 2 games. But at least the basics seem to be there, and they've even lost their grasp on that, I think, in the most recent days. So I feel like some tilt or internal conflict must be going on there as well, because otherwise you can't keep getting worse.
Well, and I think when we talk about the Lucio play on this team, they just play Lucio behind everybody all the time. That's why I made the joke about wall riding earlier, because it's such an important part of this meta is the Lucio wall riding above a choke, waiting, if you're defending, waiting for a team to come through and then dropping and booping their tanks forward or trying to isolate a tank target. And this is a team, Valiant, they just never do that. They never do it. So they're always at a positional disadvantage on defense when they should always have a positional advantage on defense.
Yeah, if you take the Vancouver's game versus Titans, that was the pinnacle of how much Cookie spends the time on ground, basically. He's a ground Lucio now for me. Because Slime, I was watching through Slime because I'm going to analyze Slime, and he was looking down on Cookie 24/7, essentially. And then sometimes Cookie would, jump on the walls, but it feels like they went from playing quick in the first few weeks to having these very weird set plays. Maybe they try to have set plays, but they just end up playing too slow now. And every other team just goes for the boops, and they just get abused by the boops now.
Yeah.
And they can't fight back at all.
And individually, the problem is individually they still have some decent players on that team. Like Fate holds his own against the majority of the other tank players. Space looks fairly decent with how he's able to eat a bunch of grabs. And
Izayaki looks great.
Izyaki's fragging ability looks really good. Like if he was playing within a system where where the transcendences weren't as important, I think that would be great. The problem is I can't give too much credit to Izayaki because he keeps using, and this is probably part of how the team has told him to play, right? It doesn't seem like these are bad trances just from him, but he's using them to either push aggressive or to save people, and it ends up just totally wrecking them because then the grabs come in from the enemy team and there's just nothing to be able to counter it, and they get obliterated, and so it's like clockwork. Every time he uses a transcendence, they end up getting wiped in the next fight and all of their ults are reset, and it just screws them for the matches. But I agree that Izyaki's fragging ability is like a revelation for this team. They should definitely be thinking about integrating him like very heavily into the core of this lineup in the future.
Well, obviously, the question is, since we know that basically this team is done, like they're obviously going to play the games and obviously still going to keep practicing, but if you are someone who's in charge of this team, you have to now think, the real topic becomes, how do I fix things for the next season? Next stage, rather. How do I fix it for stage 2? So along those lines, tying in with what you just said, do they need roster change?
I think there must
something in.
Yes, and the answer, like, there must be an internal issue here because it's the only thing that explains how this like elite level team like continues to get worse. Because in theory, what I can't get over is that in theory this should be an awesome meta for the Valiant because of the way the organization is structured and because of how like their coach, like Coach Moon,
wouldn't their style from last year? They were the consistent team, right?
Yes, and here's the thing: is that this is a team where Coach Moon emphasizes above all else, we play the meta game. He has this, like, the way that he thinks is like he wants to create the perfect Overwatch system, right? And so Valiant always plays the meta, always, and they try and perfect the meta, and they always emphasize teamwork and coordination over individual plays. That is like the core coaching philosophy of the Valiant. And so you would think that this meta should be awesome for their coaching style because it's minimally about individuals popping off. It's minimally about, sort of weird niche strategies because you can just run this one strat and you will consistently have an advantage if you do it well. So it doesn't make any sense that the Valiant will be falling apart in this fashion. So I think there must be some sort of really bizarre, like, internal issue that they're having, whether it's like an interpersonal issue or like a teamwork, like there's something very wrong here. And I guess like what I think is that they should rebuild around Space and Izayaki as like core players of this team. To the Valiant's credit, last year when they were, doing okay but not great, at halfway through the season they did a massive rebuild that proved very successful. So the organization we know is willing to undertake pretty drastic measures, and I expect we'll see those pretty soon.
I think there are some stuff that definitely makes sense to why they aren't performing well, because last season, for example, I know very well how it is to switch players between roles and also switching core members of a roster, for example, in and out during matches. For example, how Costa switches places with Cookie. It ruins the synergy between the brig stuns, the bubbles, etc. And you can clearly see Shock experiencing the same issues with switching in Rascal instead of Architect, because Rascal, has a different timing than, for example, Smurf has. No, Super. And I feel like they messed up the synergy once they switched for like the third time or something, because from what I know, like publicly, they scrimmed 4 weeks with Costa, then they scrimmed 4 weeks with Cookie. They decide to play Cookie, they fail, they play Costa, one map. Maybe it was, I can't remember if it was one map first or full round first. One map first. Then they decide to go for only Costa, then only Cookie. Like at that point, you basically wasted a lot of scrim time already. And to me, I feel like the coaches don't know how to cycle the ult, for example. Like using trances early on, that's not just Izayaki knowing how to press Q like at the right time. They probably copy other teams that go aggro with Rally. For example, Shock does it, NYXL does it sometimes, Paris does it sometimes, and they do it when they have beat for grab or when they for example, know that there's no grab bomb combo, because then they use grab for a beat because it's essentially the same as trance. And I feel like at this point, the players are probably so tilted that they know what to expect, basically, because no one is like talking about what's actually happening, within the team, if that makes sense. Like, the issues might not be brought up internally, and the players might be aware of them, but they can't voice it because of the top-down structure and being shut off from, for example, listening to Casta's knowledge about goats.
Yeah, I think as well, perhaps another simpler explanation as well. I do actually ascribe to the idea that there's some kind of internal conflict and a problem with their coaching as well. But also it could just be that the people who are calling within this team do not understand GOAT's meta very well. And as much as even if you had the best coaching in the world, if you can't, well, best coaches in the world would be able to do this, but if you can't communicate it effectively to whoever's doing the in-game shot calling, and they still don't understand enough to be able to make these calls on the fly, you're still going to get a very fucked up version of GOATs that actually comes out in the game. And just because somebody's been a very excellent caller in previous metas does not mean that they're going to be an excellent caller at metas in the future. You have to be able to have an intuitive understanding and a very quick understanding of all the different mechanics of how it plays. And Dive is very different to GOATs. So it could just be that either Custer or Kuki or Fate have different ideas of how they want to play, or one of them doesn't have a very good idea of how to play. But like, for example, Fate, they don't really have a sub for him because Kuki's been playing support the entire time. Sure. So if it's Fate that doesn't really understand how to play GOATs and is having to be led by whoever's calling in the backline, that could totally screw up a team as well.
Yeah, that surely must... Yeah, go on.
It also depends who's shot calling in a certain meta, because in previous metas, having your main tank as a caller was sort of a liability because the Reinhardt was so far in front of everybody that you couldn't really see his teammates, right? And was providing more zoning. Whereas now it's more important to have a main tank that's very vocally active because the Reinhardt is a core part of the engages that are occurring, right? So what the weird thing about Overwatch is in different metas, having like the shot calling burden sort of like switches to different players.
Yeah. I don't think that's fully necessary, to put it on Reinhardt, because when you look at Bumper in Vancouver, most people would assume, okay, he's the shot caller, but there's specific times when he's waiting, like behind a wall, doesn't see anything, and he goes to very specific locations and like very spot on timings. Like I'm playing Winston on Dorado. I can't remember the match, but he wasn't the shot caller there. And something tells me that in Vancouver, for example, you have multiple shot callers, or maybe they switch based on the map rules, whatever, or dependent on which ultimates they have. For example, if there's a shatter, then Bumper takes the space and calls for the shatter. But if they have bomb grab, they give it to Johnny or someone else. And now, if you go with the most popular thought, okay, Reinhardt is the shot caller like Fusions is for Boston, and you try to copy that, you're no longer playing to your strengths. You're playing to your opponent's. You're trying to raise your opponent, basically. And if it doesn't work out, then you end up with messed up communication.
Because obviously, since the rest of this stage is a write-off, like you would hope at a very minimum, what they will figure out is what are we going to do with the Kuki and Costa situation? Like, who is going to be the player? Like, if it's the fact that they need Costa in, then hopefully they figure that out now. Because you don't want, like, at this point in time, you have got all these official games left. You may as well make use of it to set up for the next stage.
The weird thing is, though, nobody knows what the meta is going to be like next stage. There's wildly different opinions. Yes. So it's just a bit of a crapshoot as well. Yeah, it's impossible to know.
Nobody can know. Like, there's so many changes that anybody who thinks they know is, like, full of shit. Because, like, it's so... Until we actually see some... And, like, even at the start of next stage, nobody's going to know what the meta is because the teams will probably have 1 week to practice.
Yeah, what is it? 1 week? 2 weeks?
We don't know when the patch is coming out, but it could be... It could be like
that's true. We don't even know whether it's going to be like the beginning of stage 2. So, but that's why I think the LA Valiant shouldn't restructure, because this is a proven team that's worked throughout 2018, and this just seems to be a bad meta for them. And so, just kind of gambling on the meta changing significantly seems to be a decent gamble to me. And if it carries on with GOATs, well, fair enough. You've got some time now to try and figure stuff out. So if you try and figure out your GOATS problems with the roster that you actually have, if things change wildly moving into stage 2 or, further down the line, you're just going to be set back to the same level that all the other teams are at, but you have a team that works fairly well across a bunch of different metas. So I think for some teams in the Overwatch League, they're just going to hit a meta that's horrible for them, and you just have to deal with the losses as they come to you, because you don't have the flexibility that you would in an open circuit kind of situation to be able to make big changes from tournament to tournament. You're kind of locked in to some extent. So there's going to be some times when teams are just going to suck and they have to suck it up.
It's sort of like Chengdu, where you really can't play GOATs right now. So in order, instead of like gambling, you can try to reduce the errors basically, and then go with, let's say that you have a Hammond 1 trick, you go with Hammond comps, and you still try to make the best out of it, if that makes sense. But back to like Valiant, imagine that they try to shift like the team to adapt to play GOATs, and then the meta goes to, let's say, dive again. You would have to undo whatever you're practicing right now.
Yeah.
And you're basically negative in terms of progress.
Sure. Right, well, we'll move on to another team now. But as we move on, just because of my own personal feelings as a human being, I am obliged to say that I would have thought that Moon would be more comfortable implementing a cookie cutter strategy. Right. Again, I said it's my feeling as a human being. That was nothing good about what I just did there. That had to be done, though, okay? You have to understand that. It had to be done. So now that that's been said, the other team, you've alluded to them already, is we have to talk about the Gladiators as well. This is another team that was one of the top teams in Season 1. They'd obviously gotten themselves to good shape by the end of the season. So what's happened to the Gladiators? Why are the Gladiators in such bad shape?
I think they just lack some cohesion with their tank line. Honestly, Decay coming in, I think, has been good for the team overall. And they're you don't like that Sideshow? I think he's incredibly
I'll let you go
skilled player. He's an incredibly individually skilled player, but he has been having issues slotting into the rest of the lineup, and it looks like mostly communication issues between the tank line and everybody else.
Yeah, it's super weird. When people were asking me on stream, do you think Decay is going to massively improve the Gladiators? I said, I don't even know whether he's going to play, because to have him play on the Zarya role is a huge mechanical upgrade over Surefour. But Surefour's such an integral part of their system, and the Gladiators are all about their system. This is not a team that's just going to walk over you with pure skill. I mean, they don't even really have an incredibly skilled lineup overall, if you compare them to a lot of other teams at the top. But they have to have a system that works really well. And if you implement Decay and you also don't have Bishu there to be doing any kind of on-the-fly translations, and so you're messing with the structure of how you've built the teamwork heavy GOAT style. And Gladiators is all about having that system working really well and then being able to counter-strat their opponents. I think that's how they go into matches, is they really try and break other teams' styles. When I was watching, I haven't done a full review of this game yet, but when I was watching snippets that I was able to catch of the most recent Gladiators game, when they played against the Hangzhou Spark, Gladiators looked all over the place. I mean, that was a really uncoordinated, messy game from them, compared to how tight and well structured they looked when they took on the Shock earlier in the season. So it's a bit like Valiant, where they've gone downhill. But I do think one of the reasons is that they're trying to mess with their teamwork a little bit. Also, I don't know how happy Surefour's going to be on the bench. He's notoriously in the past been the kind of person that, I don't know, thinks of himself pretty highly, and I don't know how good he's going to feel about being on the bench. So I think you're setting yourself up for some strange issues there by implementing Decay in.
I feel like Decay is insane as a player. He's absolutely rare in so to say. But I feel like once he was put in, all the unspoken stuff between Roar and him is gone now. Between Roar and Surefour, because Roar basically looks like a feeder now. Since he always dies, he jumps in too early, doesn't have bubbles, maybe bubbles are too late or too early, etc. And it feels like either it was Surefour completely protecting Roar all the time before, and the team had to pull a weight through the teamwork, or now they basically try to play around Decay more because of his tracking and all. And I feel like they are, because they eventually switched to Ana because Roar keeps getting focused and killed over and over. I think it was versus. Let's see, who did it play after the Paris game? Whoever it was. And
I think that was Spark, wasn't it?
Yeah,
no,
Spark.
London. They played against London and then Spark.
Yeah, London. And London, their GOATS is the worst one. I think even Justice is stronger than London.
No!
And I'll get to London later, but Gladiators would probably see a ton of improvements in a couple of weeks because they just need to like connect with the new piece, basically. It's sort of like a turbo. You're not used to the speed.
It's interesting too because Decay was known in Korea for being such a fantastic Zarya player, right? So you would think the automatic assumption would be, oh hey, like why isn't this necessarily working together right now? It doesn't,
especially
really
because he played with Raw on
exactly.
Like
it's even weirder, right?
It is mad weird, yeah. But for some reason, their teamwork seems to have like just totally fallen to pieces as soon as he comes in, and I don't know why, but they look like they're in 3 separate segments now, this team. It doesn't function like a team anymore.
I think your point was, even though it sounds like just a side point, is actually a key one though, Sideshow, which is if they in any way miscommunicate what they're trying to do to show for, well, why doesn't he just ask for a transfer? Because like surely this guy would be highly, like a lot of people would want to have him on their team if they want to have a Western player who could play DPS, of course.
I think the missing component though for me for the Gladiators, and we talked a little bit about this last week, was like I don't understand where their like tailored strats have gone, because when they played against Paris, they like didn't play any Sombra, even though Sombra was proven by London to be highly effective against Paris when Guard was in and playing it. And like if any team should have run it, it's the Gladiators, who are the Sombra team of last season in Overwatch League. And they just tried to play Rheingoats into Paris forever and like just lost. Yeah. So I'm confused that we're not seeing like why the Gladiators won last year was because of cool strats and because they featured a very intelligent DPS rotation, right? Like they had these niche picks, they had the Sombra, they had the Doomfist. They were rotating the DPS players in and out of every map to take advantage of certain weird picks on certain maps. Just all gone. Like, where is that right now?
I don't think it's all gone, because against the Shock, I was really impressed at how well they'd adapted to that game, to really taking advantage of Sinatra's early bubbles, and then they disengaged really well and applied a ton of pressure to Super. That looked fantastic, and they'd really like done a lot of homework there. Against Paris, I think what they were trying to do, and I did a VOD review of it and pointed out a number of moments early on in the game, was bait Benbest into going too aggressive into them. They were deliberately using early bubbles, baiting Benbest to go aggressive, and then collapsing on him. So they were like trying to set Raw up to be the bait and then playing collapse plays onto the Reinhardt when they went aggressive. But Paris just kind of figured that out and then just battered Raw's head in over and over again. And Gladiators from then didn't really have anything else they were able to do. But they did throw in some interesting stuff in Anubis, like one time in Anubis, they faked the right avenue and then immediately speed boosted around left, which allows you to get in that, the archway choke point on Anubis A incredibly quickly. So they fake Marketplace and then they rotate all the way around. And Benbest had dropped off the point. Anyway, I'll maybe get a clip of it or something. But
well, they also were trying to run
the
Junk Widow Orisa strat until like Void randomly fed his mech into like Nico's Widow when that was like completely unnecessary. So
and also,
Hydration had
about 30% of his ult after the Goats team had run circles around the point. And if you can't get your Riptire and you're playing against Goats, you're doing something horrifically wrong, because Riptire should be the win condition there for that team.
I guess what's weird to me too is like Void keeps losing his mech when he doesn't seem like he's on the same page as the rest of the roster. Like he'll just like fly off and like try and 1v1 somebody, lose his mech, and then they've got no diva.
It's not going well for them. They also do have a very difficult schedule. The thing to also point out for Gladiators and Valiant.
Both these teams.
They're in the Pacific Division, so they play against the more competitive Pacific Division teams twice throughout the season, so it's not going to get much easier. But also, the teams they had in Stage 1 were actually fairly brutal. I mean, Shock, Paris, London, Spark, and then, Atlanta and Charge. It might not have looked that brutal at the beginning, but now that we've seen where some of these teams are at, there was only maybe 2 games that you would have expected them to win there.
Also, they only played London and Paris once in the season, and both of those games were in this stage, right? So that's pretty rough.
Okay. Well, here's the thing. You can already tell, Monty, this episode is going to deliver by the way that somehow Peak has also even spontaneously learned how to hype, because you see the way he did that. He dropped like the line, like, we'll get to London later, but they're even worse than the Justice. He purposely didn't put any context on it. You could see Sideshow's face like, what the fuck? How can they? And it's like, yeah, well, obviously the context is like, London has London's players, Sideshow, so it's actually even more egregious that they're really bad. Justice has not London players. So come on then, Peak, you've teased us. Why is London's the worst courts of all?
So, first few weeks, I think they didn't have any idea of how to do anything on goats. Like, they just roll in, okay, we're going to play some corners a bit with Reinhardt here, swing. And then it's like... Fury decides to switch from Sombra to Diva during the Justice game on Sanctuary. Gesture, he decides to look at the enemies in the eye and back as they're running into him, and they just
he's a real man. He doesn't fire until he sees the whites of the eyes.
Yeah, and then like you see that just how do you say, every Reinhardt player has had this feeling where you just start spinning with holding your shield. That's just telling me a ton of red flags in my gut feeling that he really doesn't understand basic Reinhardt on that level. Like, he might understand it on a pro player level, but not in OWL level, where he knows by muscle memory how to rotate. Because there's no Gesture basically tries to cheese now with shatters. Like, they do these really awkward shatters where they speed around, and then he jumps around a corner super far in, so no one can help him in his team. They have to go bust him out once he misses a shatter, and then they maybe can hold a fight if they use trance, and they just mess up their ult cycles over and over. That's how they do it now, I mean. And then when they get to Winston goats, they try to win with mechanics rather than just tactics and strategy. And compare that to last season I felt like London was a team that really loved set plays, like set engages, I mean, with, for example, Sombra Dive. But now it feels like they're limited because of Gesture's Reinhardt. And once he's on Winston, he has a tendency of wanting to play Winston like in Dive, if that makes sense.
Sure.
I did think that Gesture's Winston in the first couple of weeks actually looked worse in Winston goats than his Reinhardt did. And he was really feeding badly. And I think part of that comes back to what you're saying there, Peak, where he was trying to play it as if it was the dive meta.
Yeah, he keeps trying to do like these pincer attacks, which like don't work in goats because you just get collapsed on and die.
You just get destroyed. You just get bashed. And he really at the beginning didn't seem to be appreciating that if you get bashed and discorded, you are gonna get melted before that bash even wears off. You're not even gonna be able to pop primal in a lot of those situations. But I would say that I think something that has improved them is playing with Prophet on the Zarya. And I feel like Prophet on Zarya has given Gesture a lot more room to be able to find his feet on Rhine. And I don't think he's the worst Rhine in the league by quite a long stretch, actually. I think Raw looks a little more lost than he does, and I think Janus is quite often way too far away from the rest of his team and getting caught out of position.
Yeah, but Janus is a pin machine, though. But Gesture, I think what ended up happening is that they told Gesture to hold shield until he has shatter, basically, and play safe to not die, because he ends up getting focused otherwise. And once he has shatter, you can go crazy like that. They tell him to do whatever he wants then. And once he doesn't have shatter anymore, he just plays safe and to not die. Because before, it felt like he tried to challenge other Reinhardts, and he like keeps swinging when there's a discord coming. He tries pins. He doesn't predict stuff at all.
Yeah, in the early weeks, he was going for a lot of really ambitious pins at the wrong times. That was something I noticed a lot. And also just getting aggressive when the enemy team was getting ready to punish him. But also, in a lot of those early games, when he was trying to go aggressive, the bubbles were just horrible from Birdring, and then the grabs weren't great either. So I think that something that's improved, I think Prophet and Gesture have got really great synergy together. They've been playing together for a long, long time. So if you were going to put anybody like in charge of building the core of your team around two players, it makes sense to put Prophet on the Zarya, and he can just play every hero as well. So is very comfortable there. But I think London are on the up and up now. I think they're actually getting to grips with what's going on, and their Sombra goats with guard on Sombra looks pretty decent as well.
He's all right on Brig as well.
Who,
like,
guard?
Guard. Like he's not bordering on Brig basically.
Mm.
This was less spicy London trash talk than I was led to believe.
I mean, he did say they have the worst goats.
Well, I don't know how to put it, but I feel like London doesn't know how to play goats, and I mean, what else can you say? Like, if they don't know how to play goats, you can't really bash them. Well, I would say
I'll put it this way: on the basis of what they've done so far,
yeah.
If what they're doing suggests that they still haven't figured it out, would you go ahead and predict that, like, for example, it'll just be like this for the rest of the stage?
I would say they won't learn goats anytime. They will just try to quick fix it and ride it out. I would say that they could pick up Panker, for example. Kaiser would be a perfect pickup for them. He can carry them alone. Like, that's how good of a... That's how much they need a competent Reinhardt. I feel like Gesture is the one hindering the team completely. Because everyone else picks up their game.
Okay.
So,
Someone get in the chopper and get out to the log cabin and bring Kaiser back.
I mean, do they even need to do anything, though, is the question, because they've won their last 3 straight.
They've won a lot of games. They've got a winning record.
They play Shanghai and Seoul to finish the stage, and then we assume that goats will be, if not dead, greatly diminished on the next patch. So do they even really care?
Yeah, now they don't have to. This would be like if I was the coach of London and I saw my goats before the week 1 started, I would have anxiety moving into the matches. I feel like they would be lying to themselves if they thought they could walk out on stage and play like they did. Because even you said it, Monte, like it's the worst goats we've seen.
When they played against Justice.
Yeah.
When they played against
round,
Justice, it's looked better since then. Since they put in Prophet on Zarya and Guard on the Brigida, I think it has papered over a lot of the issues and it has improved them. But yes, that first map on Busan was like literally the worst map I've seen so far in Overwatch.
But
like,
they didn't even play. London didn't even play goats for the first round of it. They were playing a quad DPS, and they did nothing the entire time. It was like, it blew my mind, because Justice you can tell Justice are coached, but the players don't understand what they're doing, because the setups, the places they take, like the default holds, are fine. They've been told, and they move around the map in a blob together, and they move to the right positions. But as soon as they try and take an engagement, they have no identification of opportunities that they can take advantage of. They can't punish other people's poor positioning, and they just slowly get squeezed out. So basically what you've done is you've taken 6 players and told them where to move, and then as soon as they've moved to the location, it's like a point and click game. As soon as they move to the location, they stand there and they're like,
the analogy I would give would be this, Sideshow, is that obviously, you know what, I reckon your boy Krusty's probably doing a great job, but his problem is he's playing StarCraft Brood War, and anyone who knows, if you try and air move a bunch of units in StarCraft Brood War, the pathing is complete shit. They just go the wrong. You send them in the right spot, but they go.
It's Wizard Young.
Oh, sorry, yes, I got mixed up in my head there. Yeah, it was Wizard Young I meant, but yeah, they run into walls. They go in the wrong direction.
So you're saying that the Washington Justice are dragoons going over a bridge, which basically, I think is actually a pretty good analogy.
The problem is Wizard Young thinks this is chess. No, you don't get to choose all the moves, mate. They have to, take care of it on their own once you've set them up.
But the diabolical thing is, London were also doing nothing. So all Justice did was get on the point, cap it, and then hide. And London literally did nothing. I mean, they just spread out around them and didn't shoot them, didn't apply any pressure. Gesture rolled in on the Wrecking Ball, and oh my word, his Wrecking Ball is the worst I've ever seen in the entire history of the Overwatch League. Actually, it's just a rolling potato.
It was worse than Miley Cyrus's.
It was so bad.
You forgot Jonas though. I tried asking Captain Planet, but he didn't want to answer me. But Jonas,
why is that just telling in itself?
That's so telling.
I know.
He has. I bet you that he has the league record for pins per 10 minutes, because I don't know who told him to pin, but I think their game plan is bait enemies into a wall behind them or something where Jonas can pin.
So here's a fun fact about the Justice. I didn't check the stats after their most recent game, but before their most recent game, I was looking at the stats. And the Justice are actually pretty league average. When they get the first kill, they win about 80% of their team fights, which is like right in the middle of the league, right? That's like, so I think that they're actually just like trying to get that first elimination, because when they get it, they're actually okay. So if they can just insta-kill somebody with pin, the problem is that even though when they get that first kill, their league average in terms of team fight win rate, they only get that first kill something like 33% of the time. So they
Their
almost
engages are horrific.
Yeah, so like they, even though when they get it, they can do things, like they can do normal things that a team does, they almost never get it, right?
Yes.
And the other crazy thing is that when they get killed first, like when they suffer the first elimination and they're playing that 5 versus 6,
Okay.
so now to be fair, especially in this meta, super hard to come from behind, because you can't just like have your Widowmaker pop off and kill 3 people in response, right? So you have to play as a team, so it is devastating. Their win rate when they die first, when somebody dies first, is like 5% in team fights. And a good win rate would be like 20%, right? So a good one, the best teams are only winning like 20% of the time, but that's still 1/4 of the average, which is just like, it is awful. Like awful.
That does sound like some sort of mad meme though, like 30% of the time what we do works all the time. Like what kind of whack ratio is that?
33% of the time, we win 80% of the time.
Exactly, yeah. It's like, listen, if you're trying to get to invest in some sort of a fucking blockchain here, that sort of makes sense. But for the Overwatch League, doesn't really check out the averages on that, you know.
Anyway, what I'm saying is, like, if you're so bad, then why not just go for the pin? Because, like, statistically,
sure.
But by going for the pin, that's probably half the reason that they end up fucking up so many of these engagements.
Like,
which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Like when I watched Justice, like first match, it seemed like someone sneezed on the keyboards, like the tech people, and then they are afraid of touching the keyboard because they just hold shield.
Yeah.
Then someone tells them, press shift, Jonas.
Yeah.
And then he presses shift. Now it's basically stuck in that. Half of the team, they're afraid of the keyboard, and Jonas is like continuously pressing shift. So he gets like the sticky keys pop up.
There we go. I wondered why you kept doing the shift angle. There we go. He's weaved in the Windows macro, whatever it is. Yeah.
I would go as far as setting up a key combo, you know, like in Street Fighter for Hadouken.
Yes.
Or his pins, basically, because they're ruining everything. Like when they played against Shock, Jonas goes for a pin, and it's like he would scream. Then he ends up alone and killed. And the rest of the team is barely pushing out a choke. They're barely doing anything.
I might make a video on this, but I think my favorite part of that like Shock Justice game was like they'd like run in on the ground to the death ball, and Sinatra would just be standing there on the high ground while like behind them because they're so far forward with their Reinhardt shield, and he's just like 100 charge Zarya, just like death beaming everybody from above. Or they give Sinatra time. They're like, quick engage. We don't see Sinatra. Sinatra, meanwhile, is like on this long flank, and he just appears behind them with a graviton surge, and like 6-man grabs them and just destroys them. It was super funny to watch. Like, I was like, you're just gonna ignore Sinatra this entire match? Really? That's the plan? I don't think so.
Whoever makes the strats for them, you just have to go back to 2016 and basically look at how teams play corners, for example. You know, like the big corners on Numbani or Gibraltar or whatever, like Rogue, for example. They were the ones who thought up, okay, we fight on first corner, we respawn, take the second corner on Gibraltar. And all you have to do is like use a process of elimination to decide where you're going to go, and then you have like some you have like branches of almost if statements, like in programming.
Yeah, like a flow chart.
Yeah. And that's all you have to do, and you tell your players like, okay, this is how you think, and you go in steps. So I don't think the players are bad enough like to not know how to do it. It's just that they haven't been given the tools.
Sideshow disagrees.
Yeah, I mean, I right from the beginning, this team looked like they had not picked up the right. I feel bad, honestly, for trashing them because they just looked so much worse with so much less potential than a lot of the other teams in the league. It's actually at the point where I'm like pitying them because it's not like another Shanghai Dragons situation where they're gonna go 0-40. I don't think that's gonna be possible. No. The Metro will shift. They'll do something. But at the moment, they do look really tragically bad to the point where you can't even really compare them to the other teams. They're a level below.
Here's a question for you, because like I agree that when I watch Washington, that their positioning is often like you're saying, it's like Wizard Young tells them where to go. So I don't think it's really like a coaching issue. But you have to remember that this was a team that the core philosophy was, let's build a team around Janice, which is just like objectively a terrible idea. Like it's just conceptually awful. So I don't think it's the coaching issue. So here's a question for you guys. Because we all acknowledge that the individual skill on this team is rather low for a team, don't you think that GOATs should be, if you're relying on a coaching staff, a good meta comparatively to the Justice? Like for the Justice, what happens if we go into like, you know, an individual like playmaking meta next? Better or worse for the Justice? I ask you this question.
I think it 100% should be their meta here, like their best.
Exactly,
meta.
that's what I'm saying.
And that's why I feel like some of it is the coaching issue, because you don't need, like a caveman could tell Janus to not pin. Like that's how bad it is.
But would Janus listen to the caveman? I think my issue always comes back to, even if you coach these guys well, I'm not sure that it would get through to some of these people, because the two people that have the most experience on this team, Guido and Janus, were known as the role players or the players that were the weaker performers on an otherwise very successful team, like a championship caliber team. You had NYXL and Lunatic High, and you had Janus, who was clearly the weakest player on NYXL last year. All the people on Reddit who were saying he was as good as Mano, no, stop. and then Guido, who
we actually have stats to prove that, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. The win rate was just literally 10% lower whenever they ran Janus.
Wouldn't Janus be like a very defensive, almost like Muma hides on Winston, that type of Reinhardt back in LW?
Yes, he does. Yeah, he did a lot of hiding plays and a lot of syncing up with the rest of his team, but it wasn't as effective, and he kind of played fairly one-dimensional, and it didn't seem like he had it seemed like other people were calling for him a lot of the time as well. It wasn't like him making the decisions, right? It's like he's playing that style of flanking Winston. He's being told when to engage. It seems crazy to build the team around. So, and my original point is building a team around these two people who have been just role players, not that integral parts of a championship team, and expecting them to be able to lead some other incredibly rookie players to success in a like decision-making, teamwork-based meta. I don't know. For me, it seems to come down to the players. I'm not sure that. I think they might even do better in a meta that's more individually skilled. If you just put a Genji blade in Ado's hand and, I don't know, give Corey the McCree or something, maybe they can do something.
Speaking
but when
of
you
which,
actually
by
have
the
to play
way,
Overwatch,
can we just have one moment's thought just for fucking poor Ado?
I know.
This man has drunk from another fucking poison chalice. 2 in a row.
So Mr. X brought up a good point the other day, which is that Otto might go on to have the longest losing streak of any Overwatch League player.
And he's way better than some of the other people who were on his team before. It's so unfair.
I feel bad for this guy because because by making this transfer, obviously he came in like halfway through the season last year, and like a lot of the Shanghai Dragons players who had the long losing streaks, like their support line, are gone this year, and so their like losing streak ended at 40. So I need to go back and see when Otto joined this roster. But if the Justice continue, he might actually end up with the longest losing record of any professional Overwatch player.
And ironically, there is no justice in that. That is injustice, which is his problem. He is fucking injustice.
I was
That's his problem. That's good. No wonder.
I was just thinking about the enormous bullet that Harsher dodged as well a couple of nights ago. It went from potentially being with the Justice to then being with the Vancouver Titans.
I can't lie, I did think when you were saying about the quality of the players and making some sort of a joke like this, almost looks like a team where they thought they were getting much better players, but then for some reason last minute it didn't work out and they just had to get these people.
Yeah, well, Philadelphia absolutely ruined them on Twitter recently. Like, it was one of the most savage burns I've ever seen. I think it's Lindsay, the girl who runs the stuff, and it was fantastic.
What I like about Philadelphia is because they're owned by Comcast and have infinity money, Like, they just don't give any fucks. Like, it's absolutely wonderful. Like, you know, about that whole Fusion University business, you know, the owner, Tucker's like getting involved, like getting into it with the league. And he's like, he's like personally out there just like calling them out for the two-way
He's basically like the Mark
issues.
Cuban of Overwatch.
Yeah, he just doesn't give a fuck.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
That is cool.
So what did you guys think of the fuel, speaking of banter and all, and delivering Fusion versus Fuel? Because Fusion, they seem to still have not fixed their stuff, even though Boombox is in.
Well, I don't think Boombox being out was actually their problem, is the thing. Like, I don't think that was the fundamental issue. I think the fundamental issue is that they were playing. They kept, like, every time they come out of the spawn door, they'd be on Winston Goats, play into Rhine Goats, lose, and then switch to Rhine Goats. And then you're like, okay, you're already behind. Like, what are you doing? Just play Rhine. But I think Sato is not good in this meta. Like, I really think he is not playing well as a tank. And for the life of me, I still can't figure out why you wouldn't put Fraggy in, when Fraggy obviously, like, look at Finland at the World Cup. He was doing really well.
He was born.
The level of the World Cup is so much lower, though, man.
Oh, come on. So Sideshow.
Fraggy would feed on Winston, and that's their best like asset at the moment. The Philadelphia Fusion's Winston Goats.
Okay, I do agree with that statement. However, they've had weeks to try and play Rhine Goats and get better at it. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I think, why not just play him for a map where you just dedicate yourself to Rhine Goats? It's weird to me that we haven't even seen him subbed in for like a map.
I imagine that the reason for that is that they've tried him and it wasn't that much better. I mean, I'm going to assume that they have at least tried these kind of things, because he's the only person to not be involved with the roster previously, or to like be kept on from the roster that hasn't currently been fielded. And I mean, I assume because of last year's rotations where they had everybody moving in and out of the roster in scrims, that they've at least tried this and just decided that it hasn't been working for them. And also, I think they have really gone downhill, because in week one, I was looking over their games, and my impression in the Philly-Atlanta game watching it live was that both teams played fairly poorly. It was very scrappy. It was all over the place. It wasn't great Overwatch. When I went back and watched over it, Philadelphia completely threw Volskaya by just randomly deciding to play triple DPS, which they'd never played before, and their coaches told them not to, apparently. But the players just decided to do it on the fly anyway. Apparently, Boombox said something like, "I'm playing Hangzhou," and just decided to do it. And Christopher was in my Twitch chat, and he was like, "What were they doing?" But in the rest of the game, in their Rhine Goats, they were really outplaying Atlanta. They completely isolated Popo tons of times. Their aggression ended up paying off pretty nicely. And they dominated maps 2 and 4, and would have won map 3 if they hadn't ran that ridiculous triple DPS composition. So even though it went to 5 in the end and looked incredibly scrappy, the fights themselves looked fairly decent from Philadelphia. And I think their Winston Goats is also pretty good. But over the last 2 weeks, in week 2 and week 3, it's been tragic. It's been a massive downhill slump for them, I think. And I don't just think that's because they were playing against better teams or whatever and got exposed. I think they've actually actively gotten worse. And I agree with you that it seems to be Sado that's gone massively downhill, because I thought that Sado actually played Winston Goats really well in week 1 and played an okay Rhine Goats. But watching him in week 2 and week 3, it's like he's turned off his headset and he's not even involved with the rest of his team. So again, like with the Valiant, I feel like there's something more to this than meets the eye. I don't think they're just a crap team, or that Sado is just crap. I think there's something weird going on there with their team. Like maybe they got tilted.
I think. See, you say that they're not playing Fraggy because of they've tried it in scrims, but there's also the possibility, like you're saying, that there's an internal issue that might surround Fraggy. That is why he's not playing.
Yes, I suppose so. Yeah, that could be another.
What if they're playing around Carpet, for example? Because like Gladiators, it seems like they play around DK, and both main tanks they end up dying all the time. Now, main tanks require a lot of resources, and maybe Sato is less resource heavy than Fraggy is, for example, because Fraggy loves to swing and like be aggro. And maybe you can't really focus on Carpet and then you have to choose one, basically. Either focus everything on Carpet because he's like insane on tracking and everything, but then you lose out on your Reinhardt, and eventually, yeah.
Yeah, that is true. Like if Carpe and the rest of the team wants to play around Carpe, then having Fraggy, who I assume plays Reinhardt with like one of those like iMac puck mice with only like the left click button.
Yes.
I think he probably just like has one of those from like 15 years ago. Then you might be right that's probably could be part of the reason.
I think they do play around Carpe really well in the Winston goals. I think that's one of the biggest reasons that they're so good with that, is because Sado dives in, you get an instant 40 charge from that bubble popping. Sado's pretty good at how he plays around the bubble as well as Carpe's bubble. He just generates primal, and then Carpe's just stood there on a high ground somewhere, just melting everybody down, and with incredibly accurate right clicks as well. But as soon as they got to Ryan goats recently, and also with their Winston goats recently as well, they've been terribly chaotic and all over the place. And I think their coaches have got a lot of work to get them back on track.
I just love the idea of someone actually just saying that, just going, I'm going Hangzhou now. That's like I'm helping. I'm helping. So you're not.
It actually wasn't even a comp that I've ever seen before as well. It was unbelievable. Like, it's supposed to be a DPS composition where you surround everybody and do long-range poke into the fucking Reinhardt, and Poco is on D.Va. And it's like, what the hell is Poco going to do on D.Va? You've traded your Zen, who does long-range poke anyway, for a Hangzhou, and the guy doesn't play DPS in any sense. Like, Boombox, I reckon I could maybe 1v1 him on Hangzhou.
Reasonable.
Yeah. And then you have Poco who's just doing nothing and just ends up getting demet because you can't peel for the D.Va, and she's, as soon as she uses the mobility, she's just a pudding walking around. So it was truly horrific, and I was incredibly angry watching that. But and then when Christopher comes into my chat afterwards when I'm doing a VOD review of it and goes, "Oh yeah, that was just a player's call," I was like, "What is going on? The lunatics are running the asylum."
Were you more angry about that than Mayhem losing to Reaper Genji? And ranked ults, basically.
When was that? I haven't.
Florida versus Chengdu on King's Row.
Oh, I've wiped that from my memory. That was a horrific game, honestly. But that comes down to teams need to play their own style against Chengdu. They can't just go down the same madness that Chengdu does. Otherwise, you're going to lose. They'll drag you down to their level and beat you with experience, as the saying goes.
Yep. You can't opt into the Clown Fiesta against Chengdu. It's not acceptable. No. When teams opt into the Clown Fiesta, they lose.
I think they'll get worse when they get their main people back as well. This is another one where it's like people expected Decay to get yeah. Well, people expected Decay to improve the Gladiators, and I don't think that was 100% like just a plug and play option. And I think that when Jichirin and YXL come back for, they've had visa issues, I think Jichirin is just like, it might be a slightly better Ryan, but still isn't going to be our level, and his Winston is not that great, and he can't play the Wrecking Ball to the same level that Armeng does. So they're just going to be a more versatile but worse team overall. They really need to focus on these kind of cheese strategies. So this might be kind of peak Chengdu for the beginning at the moment.
When you say Clown Fiesta, it feels like Mayhem, they basically got so affected by it, so they did the same with Houston, because they eventually went like Sombra May 2-2. And they dragged Houston down to the same level and did the exact same thing by, Houston just playing Sombra Goats into Sombra May. And I don't know how like that match went on.
You don't know what you ask for, guys. First of all, you complain about goats. Then they just start playing other stuff. Now you complain about that.
I'm not complaining about it. I like watching Chengdu play. I think it's really entertaining.
I
think it's cool that they're just so off meta.
I'm so numb from just metas. I don't really care about which meta it is.
From a viewership perspective, I think it's fun when teams opt into the Chengdu Clown Fiesta. From an objective analytics standpoint, I just don't think you should do it.
Yeah, I like Chengdu because they're making the best of what they've got. But I think other teams don't make the best of what they've got. They actively are worse than what their potential would allow them to be. But the potential for Chengdu is maximized when you play this weird stuff. So that's why I quite enjoy it.
I think they're doing a good job.
Sure.
Their team works pretty good. They're going to be able to snag some wins. I said, when I was coming into the league, this is a crazy team, and they'll be able to get their wins by playing crazy stuff. And I think if they play the meta, they'd actively be a worse team. But that doesn't mean that everyone should be doing that. That doesn't mean that Florida and Houston should be doing that. No, stop. Either find a niche that works for you guys. Then don't copy other people's niches. Like even the May stuff that Twitch's starting to pull out, that might be enough to throw some teams off their game. You know, like the Blizzard Grav combos as well.
It's sick. It's actually really fun.
It's pretty interesting because at the beginning I just thought it was pretty tragically bad, but then the more I thought about it, the Blizzard actually stops you even from shielding. So it's not just like CC.
You can't use Zarya bubbles. You can't use Rhine shield. So like it actually is quite good in certain situations. I think it does take more resources to pull off. It
takes a long time to build as well.
Yeah, it takes more so when you use it, you have to use more to get value out of it also. And because Blizzard is a very slow building ultimate, which makes sense, takes Blizzard a long time to make video games as well. But it is a very slow building ultimate. But when you actually have it, like you can actually just wombo combo people and like get a lot of movement out of a cart, or a lot of, in the case of King's Row, you can just straight up cap the first point, right?
Yeah.
So
it seems like a bit of a crutch, but I don't mind people using like cheesy crutches if they have struggled with goats, because if you just opt into direct goats v goats, you're probably going to lose against better teams. So it's good to throw in a weird curveball, assuming that you are the worst team and you're going up against someone a lot better. But when it's two even teams, or when you're supposed to be the better team, like when Florida went up against Chengdu, that's just like prime opportunity to just play default stuff and work on your own game.
It's actually an old Misfit strat, the May Grav combo. Instead of the Sombra, it would be McCree back in Apex. And I feel like they don't have a solution for goats right now, so they just look for any alternative, basically.
Yeah.
You know what I respect about Florida as well is that, you know, they signed McGravy. He comes in, actually has a pretty good performance.
What a great debut.
Right. Honestly, like looked really good. So credit to Florida, because even though like they're at least doing things, like from a coaching perspective, they're trying out new things. They're trying to find those strats, and they're also signing new players to actually help them moving forward. Because I think one of the things that hurt them was that Bare Hands who is a great player scout, was signed after they actually put this roster together. Right. And so now he's actually able to sign some new players and try and figure out the identity of this team. So it's sort of weird that like in the off season, the player signings before they had occurred before they had built out their entire coaching staff. Because remember, Ryder was, Ryder left the team. They brought in a new Korean coach. So like it was sort of weird that Florida like built the team first and then the infrastructure later. So there wasn't really a coherent vision around what the Mayhem were supposed to be this season. But I like that they're actually adding players now and exploring those options, because it feels like now the coaches are actually making decisions to form the core of this new team, which is cool.
By the way, Monty, I just want to tell him this quickly. Just on the topic of Clown Fiestas, Monty, I thought you would appreciate this, because you won't know it since you've been away from League of Legends for a while. But like during Worlds, where all the Western teams obviously were playing, and LS was doing like VOD reviews, right? And already someone like LS, in many senses, he's inherited your mantle. He's just primed for everyone to hate him, because he obviously thinks the best Koreans are better than the Westerners. So here's the thing, right? Everyone kept hating on him like super hard. And I was thinking like, what's he saying that they're hating on him so much? And then I did open one of his VOD reviews, and in the VOD, when it was like some Western team playing where they'd done some like garbage engage or something, when he would watch it, he would first analyze properly, like, they did this wrong. But then when he realized it was going to be a Clown Fiesta, he would replay the team fight, and he would literally play that music like, and then you should see how triggered all these fans were getting, like, and he was just playing it at like 3 times the speed, so they were just like getting wrecked in all the team fights. Like, it was actually top tier trolling, like it was so legit, because you can imagine how mad all the fans were. Like, you just disrespected us. Like, yeah.
I mean, I'm glad for every reason that I'm not casting League anymore. But one of the primary reasons is that like Riot itself, they've balanced the game to make it more of a Clown Fiesta by taking away, like they've slowly like stripped away vision, vision control over the years, because they're like, let's introduce more randomness into this game. Would you like skill-based vision and information? Nope, we're taking that away. We're limiting your ability to know things about the map. So they're intentionally making it more of a Clown Fiesta. Like, what the fuck?
It's what the people want. Give the people the bread and circuses. Give them imagine that, like Mark Merrill. Bread and circuses. This will be our new. The stipend will be raised, and the circuses will be all week round.
I thought Mark Merrill had a decree on like bread and sexual harassment, but that's just me.
Allegedly. I actually have realised as well, because the problem is me and Richard just overused that. Like, I said at some point, Richard, like, I'm not sure it would hold up in court if we're just saying all this shit and then afterwards just going, allegedly. Like, I'm not sure that's technically what our lawyer would advise us, to just say all the same stuff anyway. Like, yeah, he was a fucking criminal, allegedly. Like, yeah, I feel like that would be a pretty easy case to break. You know, like, I'm not sure we figured that one out. Right, here's the question then, Peak. Who is actually a good GOATS team?
Vancouver. Vancouver is good. They're better than any other team right now, I think. And you can say that NYXL is arguably the best GOATS team, but I think NYXL are really good at letting other teams play into them, if that makes sense. They put themselves into positions.
They're a passive team.
Yeah. And they're proactive about being passive as well. Like
it's like being a counterpuncher in martial arts.
Exactly. They play around Jonag. This is what I've said. Is like, I want to see the NYXL versus Vancouver Titans because I want to see a team that plays around the backline GOATs in NYXL go against a team that plays around their main tank aggressively engaging. I think it'd be super fun to watch.
I think also NYXL against Shock would be really interesting as well, because Shock still have a very aggressive playstyle, and even though they're not as good as the Titans, just increasing the tempo like that could be enough to throw NYXL wildly off the
Well, that is the next game. That is the next NYXL.
Is it really?
Game, Shock.
Yes, it's the next
match. That's actually going to be fat. That's going to be a great
it's next Friday.
If they play Rascal, it's going to be rough, but if they play Architect, it's going to be nice.
Anyway. I interrupted you about the Titans. Continue your
I was going to say
GOATS discussion.
I was going to say, like, sure, you have Bumper focused like for Vancouver, but you also have Slime. Like, he's basically like a kill reward from Call of Duty, like just coming in and sweeping kills from above. So I think NYXL, they won't be. I don't think they will be ready for Vancouver more than Vancouver is ready for them. Does it
Wait a minute, say that again. Like, I sort of understood it, but it also like took me to like another level of Inception or something when I tried thinking about it. So they will be more prepared for NYXL. Is that it? No, wait a second.
Then NYXL will be prepared for them.
Right, that does make sense, I guess. Okay.
The other thing that I'm slightly concerned about for Vancouver Titans, though, is that they struggled a little bit to play against the Sombra GOATs of the Guangzhou Charge when they played in that match.
They also were bad at playing Sombra GOATs themselves.
Yes, their Sombra GOATs is not great, but I don't think you don't need to be a team that plays Sombra GOATs. You can just play GOATs in these situations, but you at least have to be able to play against it, because if you can't control whether or not another team runs it into you. You still have to be able to deal with that. And when I went back over the Vancouver Titans game where they played against the Charge, the biggest thing that stood out to me was how many ultimates they invested and still lost in fights where Charge had the EMP. So they would ruin their ult economy and really cripple their chances in matches by over-investing ultimates, trying to overcome the fact that Eileen had that EMP. And so they would invest Trance and Nano Boost, trying to keep Bumper alive. And they would, not Trance and Nano Boost, Sound Barrier and Nano Boost to keep Bumper alive. And they would try and grab to be able to win, or something like this. Or they'd have like a defensive self-destruct and both support ultimates. And they would still lose. And the problem is, if you get EMP'd, but then use all your sustain ults, and then still lose the fight, well, Eileen's built up 70% of his EMP just winning that fight. So then you just get rolled in the next fight as well. So it totally ruins your ult economy. So the best case scenario is they just scrap it, just wipe when the enemy team's EMP is up.
I think that also it sort of sabotages Vancouver's play style to play against Sombra, because as Peak was noting, one of the best things about Vancouver is Slime's very aggressive positioning, where he's like wall riding really high up and trying to like boot people. But the problem is that if you're trying to do that, the way to play against Sombra GOATs is to hide your supports, right? You have to hide them somewhere so that they can come in with a trance or an EMP or a trance or a beat after the EMP goes off. And I think that if you're accustomed to having your Lucio aggressively positioned, and you're also accustomed to heavy engagement with Bumper, he's not going to be able to do that if one of his supports is like hiding somewhere, right? You have to wait until that happens. And I think that it, in a lot of ways, is not how the Vancouver Titans play, right?
They should just turn up the tempo. They should just be aggressive themselves against the Sombra and force out the EMPs that way. And not worry about hiding their supports or any of that shit. Because when you play against good teams as well, if you come in and beat and you've been EMP'd, the focus fire in GOATs is so extreme that one target will just die in the middle of that anyway. It's not like Trance where you keep getting healed up over time. There's just a finite amount of health there, and they can still be burst down. And so I don't think that at the top level at the moment, I don't think like beating on EMP is even an effective way of doing it. And it seemed to really hurt the Titans because they were doing what you were saying, Monty, but it wasn't working for them, and they'd be much better off just diving straight for their heads. Like, if the enemy team is playing Sombra, you should be playing aggressive anyway, because they don't have that diva to be able to do anything, and you want to get in their faces before they get hacks and EMPs active. And so I think they just need to continue playing really high tempo. And by doing that, I hope they would knock NYXL off their game and end up being better than them. But I still do think it's a potential issue for them.
I agree they should play quicker, but now this is probably a long shot. I know for EU GOATs, for example, when Sombra GOATs originally came in, it would beat like most teams, and then GOATs teams, they would figure out how to play around Sombra with normal GOATs, and you can like play quicker, you can hide, etc. It depends on the team. But then because of that, Sombra GOATs disappears, and now when, for example, let's say that Paris brings it out, because they know how some other teams would punish them with it. Maybe they copy it, and it's so exotic, maybe you've forgotten it as Vancouver because you've just been playing bad Sombra GOATs or just bad GOATs in scrims, for example. And then it takes maybe a match or two just to like see the exact punishes, and then you quickly remember.
Yeah.
I feel like they can play a lot quicker because they played quick versus Shock, for example, like Bumble going for insane shatter plays.
I want to talk about the Atlanta versus Paris game that happened this week.
I just reviewed that. That was a good game.
It was like Atlanta is like bizarro Valiant in that they seem to get better every time we see them play.
That should be the way of things, though, shouldn't it? You actually should improve over time.
In a bizarro world.
So yeah, I think that we should talk about this game because it was incredibly one-sided, and I thought that the Rain played really well. What was your takeaway from your review, Sideshow?
My takeaway was that Atlanta had fixed a lot of the mistakes that they were making when they played against Philadelphia. So that was another game that I'd reviewed where Atlanta ended up losing to Philadelphia. And one thing that was happening to them was that Pogpo kept getting isolated and picked off. So they'd try and go aggressive, but DeFran's bubbles weren't at the right time. And then Philly would come back in with their own later bubbles and isolate Pogpo. They'd hook in behind him and cut him off from the rest of his team with their own bubbled Ryan Sado, and then they'd pick Pogpo. And that kept happening fairly regularly in the matches and ended up giving Philadelphia quite an advantage in how they were playing the Ryan Goats against each other. And also DeFran's grabs were pretty far off. And both of those problems did not manifest themselves in that game whatsoever. DeFran looks really comfortable now with how he's doing bubble timings on Pogpo, and Pogpo also seems to have a much better grasp of moving with the rest of his team so that he doesn't get isolated. The disengages were fairly good, and he was hitting a lot of good earth shatters that they just simply weren't prepared for from the Paris Eternal. He was getting the best of Ben Best most of the time. I also think that Paris made a lot of mistakes in that game, uncharacteristic mistakes as well. Cruz was getting punished. So the way that Atlanta play is similar to the Shock, where they do damage on players who are around the shield and don't focus on the shield war. So it wasn't like they were really putting a lot of pressure on Ben Best. They were putting a lot of pressure on Nico and Finzi. They'd put the Discord obs on Nico and Finzi and do early poke damage to them. And also, Dogman seems to be calling Discords incredibly well because their focus fire really solid. And so they do poke damage early on, and then they use that to be able to win the fight. And so they were able to apply a lot of pressure onto Paris, especially on the players who like to play a little more individual and solo. Like for example, Cruz. So Cruz gets into position. They do a lot of damage to Cruz. He requires the armor pack, and then they go and fuck up Benbest because he doesn't have the armor pack available. So they're like putting spam on other people, which allows them to charge up Transcendence and Grav really quickly. And then they use the fact that your resources have to be spent healing those guys up, and then they attack your main tank.
Yeah, I'm actually a bigger fan of the kind of style of approach that you are talking about right there, because if you get winning the shield battle is okay, but if you get poke on targets before the fight actually begins, Brigitte will not have her Inspire up, right? So the healing output of your entire team is relatively low with Lucio and with the Zenyatta. And if you're on speed aura, right, which sometimes you have to be just to react to incoming aggression, that you have to just sort of like give up a lot of space, right? You have to back up and wait for this very, very slow healing to heal your diva back up. And then you're still not getting that Brigitte Inspire. So like, I'm a huge fan of like poking down divas right now before the fight begins, because the other team simply can't even like contest an objective until they heal back up. And that just takes a while.
By the way, I also did appreciate that thing where Dogman like shouted to the crowd that Cruz is a feeder.
Yeah.
Dogman actually told me after that episode that he used to follow like CS:GO, so low key he's a good lad. So just keep it under wraps, just keep it nice and clean, and I like it. I
do also think though that Paris did tilt during that game, because when I'm watching them, they didn't dial back the aggression and the solo plays. They went more for it. It was like they realized they were being punished, but they thought we're gonna brute force this anyway, and that always leads to terrible results, I think. So Cruz didn't stop going for these like flanking plays. He just tried to do them more often and get more.
I'll show you.
Face. Exactly. Yeah, it really did seem like that.
You think reverse psychology works on me? Yeah. Well, I'm going to do what you're telling me to do. Yeah. Like that.
I had quite not quite different, but I had a similar, like little bit different view on the game when I reviewed it. Now, from how I saw it, it's that Atlanta, they specifically targeted Cruz in Paris before the game, like anti-stratting, and they set up like blockades with Erster and Massa. For example, if you take the Hollywood game when they attack, they set up Massa on a cafe and have Erster close to cafe by the boxes, and they block Cruz whenever he comes in. They flail him, they stun him, and eventually he has to go back. So I don't think they are trying to like create poke damage or anything. It's more like they try to stop him from going for the boops, because that's apparently what Cruz does, like his thing. And eventually, well, they have the Fran shooting on the shield of Benbest as well, because his shield is going to go low and he can't really fall back behind corners like Popo can when they attack Hollywood in Dali. And then they use a bubble to bait a bubble from, not bait, but Paris uses their bubble, they burst the bubble, and then Massa goes for a boop. So they outplay Paris with their own game, basically. But they shut down Cruz because it feels like Paris has no backup plans. Like they don't know what to do when their main plan doesn't work out. And I thought it was really weird to see the Bastion strat. I guess it's because of Enlair. Because assuming they wouldn't play goats with Enlair on Anubis. But as Paris, you would never expect the Paris to stack support ults in a graph, for example, and that happened.
Yes,
on Hollywood.
Yeah.
So I feel like they tilted, and it seemed like a completely different team this week.
Thing is, on the Atlanta Reign topic, the exciting thing about them as well is not only do they obviously have a very good position in the standings, but if you look at their last 3 games, they play Gladiators, the Hunters, and then they finish against the Outlaws. So there's a very good chance this is a playoff team, basically.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They should win all 3 of those games.
Agreed.
What are the actual chances, do you think, if they're in the playoffs?
Of taking the entire thing? I think that's pretty steep. I think they are a team that's been improving, but I certainly wouldn't put them on the level of the Titans and the NYXL. I think they're playing all right, but half of that game was Paris collapsing and crumbling. I
think by the time they got to Anubis too, I mean, I love the fact that Atlanta Reign was able to play point A with the Junkrat and the Widowmaker and the Orisa, because I've been just like saying that this is still a great strat. This is still a strat that should be used. It's just Gladiators fucked it up when they tried to do it versus Paris. But like, honestly, what the fuck was Paris doing? They're like,
Yeah.
Just go play some Moira. And they just like kept playing Moira goats into it. I'm like, you guys, you literally played Widowmaker and beat Gladiators when they tried to do this to you last time. Like, why are you just keep going Moira goats? Like, it's not going to work.
I think it's because they put the Orisa shield on the bridge there whenever NLab would peak as Widow. And the Moira goats is because they have the stronger healing versus the Junkrat spam when they engage.
I understand that, but the problem is like when you're actually on that point, you can have stronger healing, but to contest the point, you're just standing in a bazillion Junkrat grenades, and then you get a Riptire every fight, which just kills the Moira.
I think Erster played it very well as well. I think Erster looks like EQO and Prophet in how he plays Junkrat, which is like incredibly aggressive, gets right up in your face, but always has his second mind down at his feet, so that if you try and turn onto him, he can just get out of there. And when you contrast that to how Hydration was playing with the Gladiators, I mean, he had like 40% ult by the time the fight was lost, whereas Erster had like 3 Riptires before they had even gotten into the point. And I think the Parrots really missed a trick by just consistently battering their heads against a brick wall of trying to come around that right-hand side. The same way as if you play Goats v Goats, that is the best way to approach, because you get punished if you go the other way. But against the Orisa composition, you can't really get punished that much if you go the other way. If you use your speed boost and you have your Moira using Fade and you have the defense matrix there for a lot of the Junkrat stuff, if you find out where the trap is or where they're expecting you to go, and you get up to the high ground and end up dropping down, now you can start taking the fight on your own territory. And now you can even buy space for other people to come in. But instead, if you just keep running your head into Erster on that Junkrat over and over again, that's really concerning, I think.
I don't think you can ever fight that fight on your own terms if you're playing Ryan Goats on that point. Like, I don't think it's possible, because the Junkrat can just mine over to a high ground that you can never reach with Reinhardt, and you have to stand in grenades. Like, I think it's actually an amazing point to play that composition against Reinhardt Goats. I think you have just a ridiculous advantage.
I would have expected them to run Winston as well, but they can't
exactly.
really, because Ben Best isn't the greatest Winston in the world.
This is why I think it was a particularly good strat for Atlanta to run into Paris. I think it was a really smart decision in that matchup to run that strat.
Come on, Peak.
Yeah, on the topic that Sideshow brought up, where they just seem to hit their head against the brick wall. You know how I think they say that they lost basically every scrim in Europe versus Goats contenders.
I think they said about 70%.
Yeah. Okay, so they copy Goats in contenders. They go to LA. They play the same type. Now, you know, the mistake, well, not mistake, but the way they lost Anubis is pretty much the same way they lost every other map. They keep doing the same thing all over it, and like all the time. And either they are not able to adapt on the fly, or they just have the same plan every week. And I think they just don't know how to solve it. Like they rely heavily on preparation before the match, and if anything deviates, it's probably too much of a mess basically within the team, you know, I'd say comms, etc., to solve it, because you have to deal with, for example, Nico playing alone on Hollywood, getting picked off all the time, Cruz getting shut down. Now you have 2 players who can't do their primary tasks at all, and they're probably frustrated about it. I feel like Atlanta, they are a team that relies less on everything going their way, you know how I mean? Like they allow, for example, creativity for the Frank going for the elevator strat with Graviton. Might not work out, it's whatever. But it feels like at Paris, when they tried going for the Bastion stuff, they just shot themselves in the foot, because they would probably do better with normal Goats just doing their own game rather than trying something that doesn't work. For example, Symmetra Goats.
Yes, that Sim Goats they ran at the beginning of Ilios as well was a little questionable. And the problem is as well, if you're running it on control or point A defenses and you lose, you've set yourself up in a horrible situation in terms of the ult bank. And so it's, unless you're very confident in those strats working out, it's just the far less risky play is to run something you're very comfortable with. Just run Goats. Just keep those ults building.
How much would you say plays into what Cruz and I can't remember who else it was in the pre-game show. They say they want to prove that you can play something else than free in a free meta. Like, do you really have to? And
I also think it was just like a bit unlucky because so first off, I think it was cocky, and I think that Paris didn't really care that much about losing control because I think they figured if they lost control that they would just roll them on the rest of the maps and it would end up okay.
Yeah.
And also I think that because they tried to play it on ruins, after that they had a 50-50 shot of it being well, where Atlanta has that like Torbjorn fucking pocket strat that they use that probably Paris couldn't practice against because nobody else does it. So I think we could have had a very different discussion if the second point was Lighthouse instead of Well. But I think by running that strat, failing it, falling behind, then losing Ruins, and then getting a 50-50 shot at Well afterwards where they had to play into the Torbjorn, it was sort of unlucky in a way. You know what I mean?
I don't think it's that unlucky.
Poo.
Sure, you can make that argument, but what I'm saying is, like, I don't think it was that. It was also circumstantial to a degree that they lost that map because they got unlucky with having Well as the second point.
Sure, but how much variation is there in the Torb strat? Because there's two variations I see so far. Either you rotate and you save the Torb turret, or you put the Torb turret high up somewhere and you have crossfire. That's
the way they play it is they wait until somebody dives in to even deploy the Torb turret. Like, they don't set up a hard point. They reactively place the Torb turret on that map, or on that point, I should say.
Yeah, and you can Fury craft that, like in Fury. Like, you don't need to go trial and error in scrims for hours, in my opinion.
Okay, what about if we talk then about the Spark? Because this is a team that came in very, very highly touted. People thought they had a chance to be one of the best teams, but they have one game left. It's against the Defiant, and if they win it, the best they can end the season on is 4-3. And obviously, you look at some of the losses they had. They had lost to London. I'm trying to think who else it was they lost to. They lost another one that was like a questionable one on paper. Like, it's fair enough if they lose to, I think they lost to Shock, maybe.
They lost to Outlaws. That was the weird one.
Outlaws, that was the other one, yes. So two of the teams, obviously, that have struggled. What do you, since we've basically almost seen the end of stage one, they're probably not going to be a playoff team. What do you make of this team, Sideshow?
Outrageous chokers is what I make of them. The scrim gods of 2019.
Tell us what you really think. Fucking hell. Come on. Keep going.
Actually, madness, the difference in quality from this team. Because when you see them, when they're playing their best, they look like a very competent team, you know? They've got some great players. IDK popping off all over the place. They've got fairly decent tank line. You know, Gusue and No Smite can both make pretty decent plays. When No Smite was playing at the end of the Valiant game, he absolutely manhandled them. They're really good at setting up Diva Bomb combos as well. They seem to have that pretty much down to a T, and it leads to these big 4K rear bombs that everybody loves. But of course they can also play the DPS kind of compositions because they have just Bazzi, who's really good at Widowmaker, and then a bunch of other players that can play other things as well. But then when you see them at their worst, it's like they have no idea how to play. So it must be communication issues on top of nerves, I think. When they played their first game against Shanghai, they said in an interview afterwards that they were like properly like shaking with nerves when they played that first game on stage. And I think that it's something that seems to be a recurring problem for them because the inconsistency and the wild swings in this team are more than we've seen from anybody else, I think. And it just makes them incredibly difficult to predict, like which Spark is actually going to turn up to this game. When they played against Houston, it was shocking for everybody. I mean, the pros that had scrimmed against them, nobody expected that to be the case. The analysts that had been watching them, nobody expected that to be the case. And it wasn't like the Outlaws had some kind of crazy counter strat or outperformed them or were insane. Spark just completely forgot how to play Overwatch. And it was all over the place. So they've got some... I don't even know what to say about this team. They are so unpredictable. It's mental.
Come on, Peak.
I think it's nerves. Like they lost to Shock before the Houston game, I think, right?
Yes. Well, after.
Yeah. No, that was after. Yeah, they lost to Outlaws, then Spitfire, then Shock.
Yeah, and then they came back and they won their last one very convincingly against the Gladiators.
Yeah, I think the loss to Shock, to Outlaws basically caused maybe feeling like they are worse than they actually are. Or who knows, like to me it looks like they choked because of nerves, not really tilt, if that makes sense. There's like a feeling I get from when watching them. It feels like they're just nervous.
Yeah, they feel scared, right?
Yeah.
It looks like they're scared. It doesn't look like they're throwing themselves in and like they're angry or they're tilted or anything. It looks like they're nervous and uncoordinated. They don't set up plays and they don't react to things. They're not decisive in how they play. But when you see them at their best, they are a very decisive team. They go, they make those plays, they push aggressively. And sometimes that led to like them being nervous, but then it was like overtime situations. And because overtime forces you to push, they'd end up winning. It was so odd watching them.
I think because of overtime, they were the team with the crazy like overtime.
No, that was Charge actually. That was Charge.
Yep.
Well, I guess like in overtime, nerves don't really matter that much. Like you go into this like autopilot mode where you're forced to like either play or not. I feel like they should play more Guju though, because I think Guju has performed really well.
Guju, they actually did. They played him all 4 maps against the Gladiators, and they won. So
I think Guju is the better option, certainly if you're playing Winston. I was very unimpressed with how NoSmite was playing Winston. And not just because, like the meme of Guju just being unbelievably good with his primals and stuff like that, but actually NoSmite in the Korean contenders looked fine when he was playing Winston. But in this matter, it really looks like he doesn't quite understand how to play Winston Goats, and he's very undecisive and like making all the wrong rotations and stuff. And between their Rhines, it seems fairly even to me. I haven't really spotted a difference. What do you think about that, Peak? About how the two play Reinhardt?
I haven't been impressed anything by Guju's Reinhardt. I think NoSmite is a Reinhardt player, and then he's on Winston when he needs to be on Winston. When it's like standard to be on Winston, like Numbani's first point defense, for example, or Horizon first point defense. I think Gladiators are the only team that forces Reinhardt there, on Numbani first point defense, for example. And I have no idea. I have no idea why. I haven't been looking into Spark that much either.
Okay. What about this then? A team you must have watched is obviously Shock. So can Shock win stage 1?
Oh, they definitely can. Definitely can.
There we go. Start the hype.
I feel like, okay, so when you see Super play, you would sometimes see him die, but like Super has been performing really well recently. Agreed. And I feel like sometimes he can be too quick in how he rotates. It feels like he's the one making the calls. I'm not sure if he does, but based on the team's body language, like he's the one to drop first from, like if they play Village, Nepal and they are high ground, he's the one to drop first from the bridge. He's the one to drop first on Hollywood when attacking first point, like from stairs. And it feels like if Violet picks up like the reactions, he's gonna match that speed, and they're gonna be a lot more quicker. They won't risk getting picked off. Rascal needs to wake up if he's gonna play, because he ends up playing Brig as if it's Winston they're facing, like versus Justice on Numbani. And I think Rascal is in just to give him not practice, but it's like stage time, but also not having permabenched. Maybe something internally, who knows. But I feel like with Architect and Violet just being a bit more safe, so to say, like he's not accustomed to the punishes, they will be a lot stronger than they are right now. And they definitely have a chance of winning stage 1.
I think they can really learn from that match against the Titans as well. If they go up against teams like that in the future, there's some real key points to take away from that. I think the first and most important one is that Violet needs to be integrated with the team a little more, because he takes very aggressive positions and outputs a shit ton of damage, but he was very slow to move with them on rotates and got caught out first pick a lot. So I think he's a phenomenally talented player, and I think he's gonna be really great with this team. But at the moment, it's a bit of a weakness for them because he's not quite tight with the rest of the team. There's an amazing moment on King's Row where the whole of their team was playing the cart, and they all Shock are a super fast team to move and react to everything, right? So 5 of their players dash down the flank, and Violet's just sat on the cart, still fighting, goes for a right click on someone, and then he's like, guys, and he just gets destroyed afterwards.
To be fair, I think part of that is also Violet's fault individually, that he's trying super hard to make plays and he's tunneling on that damage a lot of the time, and he's not paying attention to what his teammates are doing.
Yeah, he definitely, they need to improve that and integrating him in more, and it might be a bit of a language thing as well. I don't really know what Violet's ability to speak English is like. I think another big one is making sure that you don't get punished for Sinatra holding individually. There was a load of different, I know you did a bit about this, Monty, as well, and when I was doing my review as well, I found another couple of scenarios where they like to push the enemy team away and then destroy Sinatra. So it's not like they see Sinatra on his own and they all rush Sinatra, because Shock would actually quite like that, because then they can hit them on the flank of the Titans. They push Shock out, and then once Shock are pushed far enough away, and Sinatra's miles over there, they go and kill him. And another thing,
Sinatra puts himself in those positions though a lot of the time, and that's just it's part and parcel to it, and I'm hesitant to say that Shock should stop doing that, because
I think it's good.
It also wins them a lot of fights because of his position. His aggressive positioning is a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
It allows him to pump out unreal amounts of damage, especially if you're not paying attention to him or you don't realize that he's suddenly on your flank on the high ground. But it is also a punishable position at the same time.
Yeah. I think the final thing that they need to work on from that Titans game as well, if they want to win stage 1, is their strategy for control, and Busan in particular, because that seems to be where they sub in Smurf and Striker and people like that, and it's...
To be fair, one of the things I liked about seeing the latest iteration of the Shock was they put in Super on the control map, which made them play not amazingly well on control, but at least significantly better. And I think that part of it is the synergy with Super and Sinatra is a core part of what is making the Shock good. And as Peak was referring to, one of the things that Super does by dropping onto objectives early is he forces the other team to focus him, because all of a sudden he is threatening a point, right? If you don't walk up onto that point with him, then he's going to just get a bunch of % for free, right? So he's putting pressure on that point. And because he's by himself, sure, his statistics aren't great because he's standing there absorbing damage, but it gives time a lot, in a lot of circumstances, his aggressive positioning and even him dying allows Sinatra to get into position to hit the big grabs or to do just tons and tons of damage to the enemy team, right? So in some ways, he's serving as a distraction to help Sinatra be aggressive in his positioning.
I feel like they also need to add depth to their patterns of plays, if that makes sense. For example, how Moth, he would usually beat at the very end of a Diva Bomb exploding just to get the max beat HP %. Then on 2CP, when they played versus Titans, Slime, he would go for these boops to boop him up, to delay the beat and then eventually kill Moth, because Moth would disregard the position, his positioning, to be able to exit from a bomb if it's threatening both him and the teammates. So, for example, if he's on point, the teammates are at the mini house, the corner, and a bomb comes, he uses beat because you bounce up, Slime is ready, and then boops him extra. And they never really did the same towards Titans. They didn't punish Slime when he would go for a beat and then boop him upwards. And at first they didn't, Vancouver didn't do that versus Shock in the first 2 maps, but they figured it out later on, and I feel like that's also part to why they never kept first point on Volskaya, as an example. Oh, well, they did actually, my bad.
Yes, but it just took them a long time. And I understand your point as well. They need to, I think something that the Titans are so incredibly good at is figuring out their opponent's win conditions and fucking with them. And so they're not just thinking about their own win conditions, they're thinking about what could end up ruining them and making sure that does not happen. And so if there's like a Grav Bomb combo going on, then maybe they'll expend a lot of resources trying to demech the D.Va so that they can't follow up with the bomb, or they'll put a lot of pressure on a Rhine and push him out of position, or like you're saying there, make sure that Moth can't get off good beats. And Shock don't quite have that in their gameplay yet. And I think, really, I've only seen the Titans be able to do that. NYXL play a slower style that's more about punishing mistakes. It's not really about being proactive and ruining your enemy's positioning or ruining your enemy's ultimates. So I think Titans are kind of on another level when it comes to that stuff.
Oh no, they're incredibly creative in their ult economy, right? Like it's always clear that they know exactly what you have, and they've got these tools. That's what I was talking about in my Titans analysis video when they were attacking that point on Volskaya. Like they knew what the options were for the Shock were, and so they knew that they had to use this self-destruct to create a zone to kill Sinatra, and like that was the best way to win that point. It's amazing, really.
Yeah.
So it's like in that moment, you could see that they both had excellent command over enemy ult economy, their ult economy, and the stylistic preference of San Francisco for playing that point. This was super cool.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Right. What about, I'm just going to go ahead and admit it. This is secretly the team that I'm just going to ask about every fucking week till I get some substantial answers that set my mind one way or the other. What about the Seoul Dynasty? Because the thing is, it's not just nostalgia. I do see occasional flashes that tell me something could happen with this team. Like Flair still does some pretty nice shit. Fisher's still a very good player. So why isn't it all come together?
Last game versus NYXL, I haven't seen it yet because of EO hours, but I can speak about the older games after you guys give your thoughts.
Well, any thoughts on that?
I also only caught snippets of the Seoul NYXL game, but I know that it was incredibly one-sided.
Yeah,
and the only map they won, they also failed on the offense. So
and
it doesn't look good.
Also, the NYXL threw the last fight on Numbani, which they should have won. So there was a lot going on there. I honestly don't really understand how the Seoul Dynasty can go from playing very aggressively to weirdly passively from match to match. Like it looks like they're a different team.
I think
there's like two different teams.
Yeah, I think there's actually two different teams within this team as well. And I think it's I'm going to pin most of the blame, honestly, on Fleta, weirdly. I think that Fleta Zarya is really quite passive in a lot of these situations, and his bubble timings seem to be very poor. He's outputting a crap ton of damage and staying alive a lot, but he is never in the most aggressive positions possible. And that means, and his bubble timings are great. So that means that Fissure wants to play aggressive, but Fleta's kind of baiting him in order to get charge and isn't really supporting Fissure. So the way that this team would like to play is around Fissure, where you give him all of the resources, and Munchkin and Fleta both play pretty aggro as well, and you end up just playing aggressively into the enemy team. And instead what happens is most of their team kind of hangs back, but Fissure wants to get aggressive, and so he ends up just getting hung out to dry and ends up dying. And the Seoul are also very slow to be able to react to things. They're not fast with rotations. They're not fast with disengages. They're not fast at capitalizing on opportunities. They're a sluggish team. And if they are able to increase the speed at which they react to stuff and also fix Fleta's aggression and bubbles, I think they'd be a much better team. So I think some parts of it are working pretty well, but there's a lot of fundamental stuff that I think is out of whack for them.
I feel like Fissure was the charge for the first game they had in week 1. Then when they faced Dallas, I feel like it was the Seoul that loses. To me, they seem like they overthink about comps. They overthink about like the high level stuff, and they forget like the steps in between. Like you say, they are sluggish, for example, and they end up giving away, for example, old charge here and there, and etc. And how much of that could be, for example, because of how Fissure is like the main leadership, I guess, because when he was picked up, they also released this video, right, where he says he believes Seoul lost because they trusted the coaches too much. And like
that was incredible. I was dying watching.
I was like, that is like the peak Fissure moment right there.
What
Right?
an absolute mad rebel.
It's like, don't even wait 5 minutes to be in the team before you just wreck your own coaching staff. Fucking hell.
Crazy. I mean, none of the coaches are
What a
actually
legend.
with them anymore.
What a legend.
But
Sure.
even just the idea of it, like he's in the, like
good,
he's in
isn't
the,
it?
yeah, like he's in the dugout and he's just like, they're
I
all
just love
nodding
it.
along to what's going on, and then Fisher's like, it's all right, don't listen to him anyway. We'll just do whatever I tell you in the match.
it feels like he's either fist fighting the coaches, or it's like the coaches are working with him, but the rest of the team is like they gotta go through his filter, sort of. So like he has to approve whatever they're thinking, and that's some delay.
Okay.
I just like Fissure just rolls into any team and he's like, I'm the captain now. You know?
It's like he walks in and you've got all your like your best strats on the whiteboard. He just comes in like, you know, the new teacher who comes in. The first thing they do is they get that like the chalk eraser and they wipe everything off the board and then they just write their name on it. He goes, Fisher, my name is Mr. Fisher. You will refer to me by that during this class. Like, forget everything you just taught, throw it all away. You know when they try to do like the emphasis, like they get the old textbook and throw it in the bin. Forget everything you learned last year. We start now. And then obviously, here's the thing, if the coaching staff needs sort of a catchy way to get through to Fletter, just tell him, the problem is, Fletter, you're playing too much of a BG, whereas we need MJ. And he'll be like, what the fuck does that even mean? What a bad game. No, all you're doing at the moment is just staying alive. But we need you to unleash aggressive bubbles. Now that was fucking layered right there, Sideshow. Michael Jackson had a chimp called Bubbles that was known to attack and bite people. Meanwhile, the Bee Gees are famous for their hit song Staying Alive, which is somewhat played out at this point in time.
I think you're a bit older than me.
It's all right, mate.
It's all right. Rushing noises.
It's all right. It's all right. I'll explain 2 hours ago. You know.
I you know what the best part about Fissure to me is, like, I can't necessarily say that he's wrong because of the way that the Gladiators collapsed in the playoffs without him. Like, I'm sure he was just sitting there in the team house giggling to himself, watching them totally get wrecked by London on the last
with Eminem without me playing in the background on repeat.
and then he's like, wow, they were dumb. Look at them losing without me. Yeah. Right. So I can't even necessarily say Fisher's take is not the best. So
I don't think he'll be giggling if they end up benching him for Marvel, because he'll struggle to find another team as well. If he ends up being on his 4th team at some point this year or next year, I think that's a reputation that's going to follow him around, because even if there isn't that much to it, the idea that he comes in and takes control of teams, it certainly appears like that from the outside.
I feel I just think he needs to find the right fit, right? Eventually, some team's just going to be like, fuck it, Fissure, you're so good, because he is fucking good. We're just going to build the team around you. You're the boss now. Somebody's going to give him that opportunity.
That's why actually it feels more like a Western team would be the place for him, because we can accept a bit of ego as long as you're a sick player, basically. Whereas, like, that's exactly where you'd think being in an all-Korean team, it isn't going to vibe that way.
It's also, I also think, like, you have to take that kind of stuff in esports with a grain of salt, because so often what ends up happening is that I would say a normal amount of aggression and competitiveness with, sheltered gamers, turns into a bad situation really quickly.
It gets exacerbated for sure, yeah.
Yeah, whereas, like, in regular sports, star players are frequently giant assholes, incling being giant assholes.
Just look at all the wide receivers in the fucking NFL who are star players. They literally, there's a reason they call them diva receivers.
But you know what? They're good enough that people put up with it and they learn how to deal with it.
Yeah. It's the same analogy.
I feel like the threshold for putting up with that is very low among other esports players, and that they need to just sort of bite the bullet and let Fissure do Fissure things as long as he keeps popping off.
The assumption here as well, though, is that somebody's limiting Fissure's ability in this game, and I'm also not sure that is the case, because Fissure's never played in like a GOAT system before, and his style of Reinhardt is pretty, I don't know, it's definitely different to how it's usually played in GOATs. So it's it's also possible that he does have full run of this team and just doesn't quite have the greatest understanding of how to play goats and is therefore not able to reach his peak. And it might not be that anybody else is holding him back, but from the outside, it certainly does look like he is trying to play one style and the rest of his team is trying to play another.
Yeah, like Fleta, for example, like you said, with the bubbles and all. I feel like Fleta is a very rational player. Like you can tell him something with logic and he understands it and does it. But if you're the Reinhardt telling him how to play Zarya and you like think from a Reinhardt's perspective, you don't really see all the intricacies that Zarya has, for example.
Sure.
You might miss out like how to be disciplined about bubbles, for example, like when you can use the bubbles to bait but also not bait, and and I'm not sure I think we'll see by stage 2, for example, who makes the strats. Like if it's around Fissure still, and it looks like he's the one making the calls, so to say, because when he played in Gladiators, it was very obvious that he was the one making the dives.
Yeah.
And I definitely agree it doesn't work out in Goats. I was thinking, like, what if he's trying to be a star player too much? Because, Reinhardt gets the VIP status, and then he forgets about needing others to empower him, not only outside of the game, like that's probably fixed, but you have this, like a slime booping people, do you have like a cruise, like cruise massa, etc. Do you have maybe they rely on Zen, for example, trying to frag out, who knows, like to compensate for weak points in their team play.
Yeah, they definitely do seem like they have weak team play. I don't think that I would really say that I've got a problem with anybody's individual performances. Like, I think Jaehong, I thought that Jaehong might just be totally washed up this season, actually. I thought it might be like 2019's Miro, where he just goes, everybody else overtakes him on the flex support position, but he's played surprisingly well. He still looks like a pretty competent Ana. His Zen looks on point. He actually hasn't beefed too many of the ultimates, and he's not been caught out of position that much. So I've been pretty impressed with him. Jexa as well has actually been fairly decent. Some weird stuff, actually. I thought perhaps he would be, one of the elite Lucios and looked like it early on, but I think he's dropped off a little bit. But still looks fairly decent. Michelle's got a lot of talent and is incredibly flexible, is possibly one of the best players in this meta on this team. And then Fisher's very talented, and both of Munchkin isn't the greatest, but he's doing okay, and Flood is there, but the team play between them all is really poor, and I don't know what the solution to that is. They might just, again, be one of those teams that tries to ride it out and rally behind whatever the future metas are.
No, I would say like it definitely looks like they try to be creative with strats, just like pulling out Orisa where it shouldn't be working, like they did versus Dallas, because like Dallas played a lot of Orisa, so like you can surely assume that they know how to beat Orisa with double sniper on King's Row.